Chess openings. For some reason, everyone worries about their chess openings. In fact, many players think that the only two things worth studying are openings and tactics. So these people learn the tactical basics and then memorize a bunch of moves in whatever opening system catches their eye. And I assure you that this is completely wrong. In fact, it's wrong on many levels. The first thing to understand is that a chess opening is all about setting up some kind of strategy. The middle game is all about employing that strategy. Sadly, if you don't understand your opening's positional and tactical basics, you can't create any kind of realistic strategy. And if you can't do that, when you reach the middle game, you'll have no idea what's going on. I've had firsthand experience with this kind of I'll memorize a bunch of moves opening misconception. During a lesson, an inexperienced student will play a few moves of opening theory. I'll stop him, and then I'll ask, so, what's your opening about? And what is the purpose of the moves you just played? A common answer is, those are the book moves. I memorized them, so they are the right ones. Students that give me this answer are full of good intentions, but memorizing tons of moves that make no sense to you is a recipe for disaster. So, what's the right way to study an opening? The most basic point of an opening is to get your pieces developed. Not 2 or 3 pieces, but all your pieces, since chess is a team game. And if you want to do well, you'll need your whole team to participate. Imagine a general demanding that his troops go into enemy territory and take over a specific area. It's teeming with enemy soldiers, but the general decides to attack with 2 men. Unless one of those men is Rambo, those 2 guys will be cut down and the plan to acquire that area will fail. The futility of such a venture may seem obvious, but in chess, every beginner, and quite a few experienced amateurs too, gives that kind of thing a try. Only after experiencing failure over and over do they finally realize that something's wrong and more pieces are needed to succeed. People who have just started out only need to do 2 things in the initial phase of the game. 1, develop all your pieces, and 2, use your pawns to gain space. This simple formula will give you a lot of insights into the positional and dynamic niceties and dynamics that pieces and pawns offer, and will also give you hands-on experience about what a full army in motion can do, especially if your opponent is only using a couple pieces. Beginners, then, don't need to study openings at all. Just follow those 2 simple recommendations and you'll do fine. However, after you get some battle experience, there will quickly come a time when you sense that more is needed. When that feeling hits you, it's time to take the next step. Once you have some battle scars and have trained yourself to develop all your pieces as quickly as possible, it's time to embrace one of 2 opening philosophies. 1, learn a sound, easy to remember setup that only calls for minimal study. This gets you through the opening without having to fear enemy preparation and, as they say, lets you just play chess. These openings tend to feature closed or semi-closed pawn formations. 2, feeling macho? Go with a gambit-only opening repertoire. This is a good way to have some fun and improve your tactical skills. Eventually, you'll probably move on to more serious openings, but it's a good way to start. Gambit openings tend towards wide open positions, which allow your pieces plenty of space to rush about and create chaos. In this lecture, I'll offer 1 complete opening repertoire based on the easy-to-remember setup mentioned a moment ago. Of course, you can tweak it or move on to other openings anytime you want. However, this will show you how openings should be studied. What you need to do is look at games in a database or books or various online sites and choose an opening that attracts you. For those that have tablets or smartphones, ChessBase has a 5 million game database app for Apple and Android. This database app is extremely inexpensive, just a few dollars. Another thing you can do is get a book on your favorite opening of choice, or a chess teacher, if you're lucky enough to have one, will explain that opening's basic positional ideas and setups. That same book should also point out the tactics that often occur in your opening. Once you know the kinds of positions you're after, it's time to memorize the first few moves, just the first few moves. Those moves will stick with you since you know the setup, which can be viewed as the destination. Keep in mind that when you properly study your opening, you are also getting a lesson in middle game play. The opening you choose should be the beginning of a grand love affair. You should love everything about it, and it will repay your love with many fine victories. However, initial losses are unavoidable. Don't make the mistake of looking at your opening with sad eyes and say, "Why have you forsaken me? Why have you let me down?" The truth is that you misplayed it, which led to the defeat. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Everyone misplays their opening until a body of experience is built up, and losing is one of the steps that creates experience. I highly recommend that you play quick games, perhaps 5 minutes each, online using your opening systems in every game. This hands-on approach will iron out your opening's bugs in a painless and fun manner. Chess.com offers this kind of online play for free. I recommend a setup known as the Zukertort system, which is both dangerous and flexible. White's pieces are quickly developed, and White's central pawn structure gains space, with more spatial gains possible with an eventual c2 to c4 or e3 to e4. In some lines, the battle can erupt in the center, and at other times, White can go directly for the black king. Thus, a nice mixture of positional play and attacking chess is always on the table. The following initial moves are seen quite often: d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, e3, e6, b3, bishop e7, bishop b2, c5, bishop to d3. Both sides will castle and then make some decisions about the path they will take. Here are 3 common themes for White. Our first theme is where White plays for a central break by pushing his e-pawn to e4. By pushing his b-pawn to b5, Black is threatening to play c4 and kick the bishop away. White takes immediate action against this. Takes, and e4. If Black's queen moves away from the protection of the f6 knight, White can chop it off with bishop takes f6, ripping open Black's kingside structure. However, e4 to e5 is also hanging over Black, when a knight retreat might lead to a classic bishop sacrifice. This sacrifice was explored in Lecture 7. Black can capture on e4. But after knight takes e4, we have a wide open position where White's bishops are staring hungrily at Black's king. Further exchanges make things even worse for Black. Knight takes e4, bishop takes e4, queen takes d1, rook f takes d1, bishop b7, and rook to d7. Black loses material because the bishop's attacked, and if he guards it, you just snap off the bishop and take the knight, and you've won 2 pieces for a rook, which is a very good thing. Our second theme is all about central play by c2 to c4. Here's an example. c4, Black captures in the middle, White recaptures, and Black tries to get his bishop out by putting it on b7. And now White plays his queen to e2 and starts building. And the rooks come in the middle. And Black tries to get his bishop out by putting it on b7. And now White plays his queen to e2 and starts building. And the rooks come in the middle. 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 And the r Notice how this D pawn here is guarded twice, so it's perfectly safe. And the other rook comes in the middle. Very important. Get those rooks in the center. And now we threaten to take the knight and rip open the king. So he takes, we take with the bishop, and he brings his rook in the middle. However, this allows a classic bishop sacrifice, which we looked at in previous lectures. So we sacrifice, knight g5 check. The queen comes storming out, threatening mate in one. Bishop to d6. And now the king would run if you do the check too quick, but it's not going away. So what we do is we go d5, which is a major concept in this opening, which opens up this bishop. And now the bishop is going to join in on the attack. In the meantime, we're also attacking black's knight. So the knight moves away. Check. King f8. Check. Thanks to this bishop. King here, checkmate. Our first theme was at some point to play for an e3 to e4 central break. Our second theme was to go for a c2 to c4 break. Our third theme is going to be all about sticking white's knight on e5 and pushing the f-pawn. So it's white's move. He plays knight e5. If you're allowed, you're going to follow pushing the f-pawn to f4, and you're going to have the makings of a kingside attack with this very powerful knight. So he takes it. You take back, and you play f4. And after something like bishop b7, you can come all the way out, and if you look at this, all of your pieces are aimed at the king's side, and you have very good kingside attacking chances. Here we're going to be looking at a different setup for black that kind of puts us in spin. He's going to fianchetto his king bishop, which means that we're going to have to make some changes ourselves. After d4, knight f6, knight f3, g6, e3, we're continuing with our normal stuff. Bishop g7, b3, castle, bishop b2, and now d6. The problem for white is that because the pawn's at g6, it's going to be harder to hit this king's side. We're not going to be able to kill that king. And since the pawn is on d6 instead of d5, like in our normal Zukertort, the e5 square is covered. So it's really a different animal. And this is the one challenge you're going to face to this opening. So what you want to do here is place the bishop, instead of on d3, only if he fianchettos and puts his pawn on d6, which some will, you want to put your bishop on e2. And then after something like knight bd7, castles, and he's going to play e5, you could just ignore it and play c4, but you should take it. Now your bishop is looking pretty good on this diagonal. And he's going to move his knight, and you cannot move this pawn again here because this bishop is pinning against the other bishop. So all you do is develop. Just get your pieces out. So we're going to go c4, and that's a nice move. You're getting some control over d5, getting some space. He recaptures, and now you bring your knight in front of your bishop and continue going after the d5 square. And if he takes you, you continue with yet another piece hitting the d5 square. Now you have your pawn, knight, and bishop, all hitting that key square. And the game might continue very quickly, queen d2, a5, and now just something like rook a d1. And you have a pleasant game. Your bishop here is guarded by the queen. You have a lot of pressure down this file. You have more space, Very pleasant position. So this is how you would handle the fianchetto with d6. Your white repertoire is based on our dangerous but flexible setup. The initial 6 moves and the general setup is pretty much all you need to memorize unless your opponent fianchettos his kingside bishop. In that case, you will place your light-squared bishop on e2 instead of d3, castle, and play c4, followed, in most cases, by knight c3. Naturally, as you get used to the opening, you'll make adjustments that suit your taste. And if your opponent throws a move at you that seems different or scary, and that'll happen a lot, take your time and try to adjust to whatever new situation is being tossed at you. So far, we've gone over your white repertoire. As black, I'll recommend the Queen's Gambit Declined, which offers a battle-tested setup that is popular among both amateurs and pros. The setup you'll learn, known as the Tartakower variation, can be used against every white opening except e4. Black's initial moves are d5, e6, knight f6, bishop to e7, castle, and if the bishop was at g5 for white and you wanted to hit it, h6. In many lines, black will follow up with b6 and bishop b7 when the bishop has a nice roll on this long diagonal. In fact, after black places his light square bishop on b7, the position is almost a carbon copy of the Zukertort system. The only difference is that the light squared bishop is developed to d3 in the Zukertort, while it's placed on e7 in the Tartakower. One of the nice things about playing 2 very similar systems, even though one is white and one is black, is that you can often borrow themes from each one. Here are 3 common themes for black. Our first theme is the creation of hanging pawns. Black's side-by-side pawn duo, here and here, is known as hanging pawns. Sometimes those pawns can be attacked by rooks on the c and d files, but more often than not, they're also a source of strength since they control the b4, c4, d4, and e4 squares. The game continued queen a4, queen to b7, which guards d5 and hits b2. Black moved his queen, guarding b2 and attacking c5. And black develops and defends c5. Knight e1, a5, gaining some queenside space. Knight d3, rook f, b8, increasing the pressure against b2. Black has the advantage. He has lots of space, pressure down the b file, and he went on to win in 31 moves. Our second theme focuses on white's king in the center. Black's king is castled, white's is in the center, and black tries to punish it. So to punish white for leaving his king in the center, you want to rip open the middle so your pieces can get at it. So c5, immediately going after everything. He takes, and now all of a sudden, white has pressure against d5 with his queen, his knight, and his rook. But black doesn't care. He's going for the gusto. Knight to d7, developing another piece. Now he's ahead in development, on top of the fact that his king is safe and white's isn't. White brings his knight to the middle of the game. Black takes. Knight takes e6. F takes e6. Bishop e2. Rook b8. And though white avoided being punished, since white, instead of winning pawns, quickly tried to develop, realizing that he might be in trouble, black now has tremendous pressure on the file, a big pawn center, and just has an obvious advantage. After knight d7, white does have the option of getting greedy. So, c takes b6. He could just start taking pawns and daring black to prove his point. d4, opening things up because now the queen is threatened. The bishop is uncovered on it. So knight to d5, blocking that. Knight takes b6. Knight takes f6 check, so you can't take the queen because you're in check. Queen takes. And if you look at this, though white's a pawn ahead, there's a huge lead in development for black. White's king is in the middle, and all these open files are looming large, and black has tremendous compensation for that sacrificed pawn. Our third and final Tartakower theme is giving white an isolated d-pawn. In this situation, black simply captures and creates that iso. He takes back, you chop off that bishop, you chop off another pawn, and lo and behold, there's this isolated pawn. Since we've studied this before, you would know to bring the knight here, dominating the d5 square, stopping the pawn from moving, and then you would follow the usual isolated queen pawn rules that we've discussed. The Tartakower variation is easy to understand and very popular since black gets quick development, a safe king, and full play in the center. Pawn structure is what this opening is all about, be it the hanging pawns, giving white an isolated d-pawn, or simply butting heads in the center when both sides' pawns crash into each other. Black's c-pawn is very important in this opening. Sometimes it will fortify the d5 pawn with c7, c6. But usually the main goal is to push it to c5 where it creates an immediate central battle. Though there is a lot of theory in the Tartakower variation, you won't need to know it until you reach the expert or master level. In the meantime, just get used to this opening's themes and key setups, and you'll do very, very well. In general, e4 leads to open or semi-open positions, while d4 leads to more closed positions. However, the French defense is an anomaly and often leads to rather closed pawn structures. I've chosen the French since its general philosophy is straightforward and easy to remember. The initial moves are e4, e6, and you have to ask why. The reason you play e6 is to follow with d5. So after d4, you push d5, and if he dares capture, normally you would have to take with your queen, which you don't want to do because you don't want your queen out too fast. But now, because of e6, you can recapture with a pawn, giving yourself control over c4 and e4, and everything is cool. Here are two common things that black should avoid. As a French defense player, you need to avoid this kind of situation. The problem with black's position is that white's knight is reaching in all directions and nothing can kick it off the d4 perch. Compare the knight to black's pathetic bishop, which doesn't have anything to do, and you'll know which one you would prefer to have. This is our second theme that black wants to avoid. Things have gone all wrong for black. The e5 square is white's. Black's e6 pawn is backward, and if white doubles his rooks on the e-file, e6 will become a target. And white's knight is more monster than horse as it lounges like a king on e5. Here are two common themes that black should embrace. Our first theme that black should embrace in the French defense is getting his bad bishop outside the pawn chain. Black has a queenside space advantage and can wage war in that section by pushing the pawn to b4 whenever he wants. However, can black do something about his light-squared bishop, which is largely a defensive piece? Yes, he can. A typical way to get it outside the pawn chain is bishop to e8 when moves like bishop h5, pinning white's knight, or even moving the bishop to g6, hitting the queen, turns the defensive bishop into an active warrior. Our second theme in the French defense that you want to embrace is challenging white's spatial advantage. Let's have a look at how this is done. After e4, e6, d4, d5, e5, black has less space because of white's advanced e5 pawn, which gives him kingside space and central space. So black needs to counter with c5, trying to take over that sector of the board and also hitting the d pawn. White defends that pawn. Black hits it again with his knight. Now he has 2 units hitting d4. White defends it. Now he hits it again. Now he has 3 units hitting d4. White can't guard it again, so he just moves his bishop. You take, and now you want to hit it again, so you bring your knight out, and you're going to move the knight to f5 and hit it yet again. So white moves his knight, you move your knight to f5, hitting it again. Now you have 1, 2, 3 guys hitting this pawn. White's knight comes back to guard it, and now black usually plays something like bishop to b4 check, or even bishop e7, or even just bishop d7, and it's an interesting game. These ideas are important since the theme of attacking d4 is a major French defense motif. However, though meeting e5 with c5 followed by queen b6 and knight c6 is both good and extremely popular, it's also very complicated and theoretical. So when someone does toss the advanced variation at you, which is 3e5, I highly recommend the following rare, easy-to-play line that has recently acquired some Grandmaster fans. e4, e6, d4, d5, the advanced variation with e5, and now the strange bishop to d7. Why? White plays knight f3, and now even stranger, a6. That is odd. Why would you want to do that? This is actually an important theme. Black wants to trade his bad bishop on d7 with white's good bishop. Notice that white's bishop could eventually go to d3 and kind of aim at your king, while black's bishop isn't doing much of anything. So what black would like to do is, if he's allowed, move his bishop to b5 and face off with white's bishop and make that exchange. And black has successfully traded off his bad bishop for white's good bishop. The French defense can be extremely theoretical, outrageously tactical, and endlessly confusing. If a time comes when you wish to enter these crazy, super complex lines, then go for it. However, right now we're looking for lines that allow us to just play chess without having to memorize reams of analysis. And so I'll recommend a line that is easy to play and fits in with our philosophy of learning setups and ideas while avoiding too many fixed moves. e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, knight d2 is going to be the same. We're going to have you capture. Takes, knight d7, knight f3, and just calmly develop your pieces. Knight gf6, he takes you, he develops, and now you use your c-pawn to crack his center. c5, he takes, you take back with the bishop, he does something, queen e2, and you castle. And you have a perfectly reasonable game. For example, castles for white, b6, you want to get this bishop at c8 in the game, bishop g5, bishop b7, and you're perfectly okay. You have your 2 bishops zipping down these diagonals, and you're almost fully developed. You'll get your queen out of this open file, bring your rooks in the middle, and life will be good. The ideas for black in the e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, or knight d2 line are fairly simple. Quick development, castle, often activate the light-squared bishop with b6, followed by bishop b7, and crack the d4 pawn with a well-timed, or sometimes quick, c5 push. All in all, once you get past the develop all my pieces phase, it's good to create a real opening repertoire. By doing so, all the games you play will be training tools, since each battle, whether you win, draw, or lose, will give you new insight into the systems you chose. I don't expect you to memorize more than a few moves. What you should do is get a solid grasp on the opening's key setups and ideas. Playing through these games multiple times will help you get a feel for these things. And when you mix it with online quick chess training, you'll soon feel comfortable with your opening repertoire.